welcome to day 3 of Anantha, the Poetry Festival being organized by Samyukta Poetry. And it is with a great sense of happiness and joy that I'm welcoming Sampurna Chatterjee, eminent poet, wonderful translator, an excellent author, and somebody who straddles a very interesting world. That's how I see it. Because for me, Sampurna Chatterjee is somebody who occupies a world that is viewed through psychedelic lenses, where the lights are neon and the streets are full of droplets of multicolored water. And in the middle of all of this, there is an individual, who is quiet, who possibly does not want to, put themselves out there, but they're just so shockingly beautiful, so adorably, heartbreakingly delicate that you just can't help but want to be them or want to be by them or with them, as it may be. For me, Sampurna Chatterjee is somebody who takes us through those alleyways of the city where possibly we may not think of venturing, but once we go, it could be like Diagon Alley of Harry Potter, where there is so much of wonder. And probably where we see ordinary bricks and mortar, Sampurna might be seeing, I don't know, bricks that transform themselves into John Lennon at every given opportunity. Because it's that beautiful and that bright, the kind of world that she brings us. At the same time, she is also capable of seeing the mellifluous, the melancholic, the sweet, the silent, the reflective aspects of somebody else's words. Those are the words that she brings to us in translation. And then, as I mentioned earlier, those cities, it's not just the neon lights that she sees. She also sees those people who seem to possibly be holding hands under the bridge because maybe they cannot hold it elsewhere. Maybe elsewhere this is frowned upon. Maybe elsewhere they're not supposed to do this. So those elsewheres, those bright lights, those quiet lights, this and more is what Sampurna Chatterjee means to me. And this is exactly what I would like to bring to you this evening. And having said that, I would like to say that many years ago, when I was younger than I am now, Sampurna Chatterjee had come to the college where I was teaching. I still am teaching there, but Sampurna Chatterjee is not there anymore. So the person who brought her, a very eminent writer in her own rights, Kaironisa A, who writes for children these days, she had, invited Sampurna over. And then she said, look, Sampurna Chatterjee is coming. And, we were stupid at that time. And we said, kind of a thing. And we missed that session. But then years later, thanks to the quarantine train, we happened to meet again. And then I realized how wonderful Sampurna is and how one can be idiots when one is young. So in order to correct my idiocy and, to bring this ebullience, to bring this joy into all your lives who might be watching right now and who will go on to watch it someday in the future, we're leaving this message out there and welcome Sampurna.
What can I say after that? It's just, I'm very rarely at a loss for words, but let it be noted that that moment has come. So thank you. I hope I can live up to even a fraction of what you've suggested. I really feel rather overwhelmed. I have very fond memories of that visit. It was, as it happens, with my very first novel, Rupture, that I visited the college. And you know what it is about the first novel, the first poetry book, the first love at first sight. You mentioned the city. That's what happened to me with Bombay, Though I, in the story that I have, the eponymous story, Dirty Love, I say, I very neatly transfer this emotion to another character, of course, as I often do. And I say it was love at first smell. And then I, of course, catalog all the visceral, olfactory reasons why Bombay became this, this precious thing in my heart. But really, thank you so much for that very warm and very, I would say, um, astonishingly perceptive uh, reading, because it's almost like, oh, this is who I am and what I have been trying to do. So thank you, Sonia.
Oh, that's well. So let's begin at the beginning, Sampurna. Tell us something about your early days in childhood.
I tend to believe that I started off on the wrong foot, in that I started off living in a storybook world. So Darjeeling for me was pretty much, um, when I look back, I realize it was a kind of a marvelous fiction that I lived in. I lived in the world of books. I lived in a make believe world. I had already started reading and writing, as if they were the only activities that mattered, apart from, of course, vanishing into the hillsides for hours on end. So that was the kind of childhood I had. And I think if I hadn't had that absolute freedom, as it were, to wander, which was possible in those days, also because my parents were they were teachers. I come from a family of teachers, Vanya. So, they just let us loose. And I think that being let loose, sorry, not only on the hillsides to wander, but also in the libraries, whether it was the home library, or it was the junior school library, or the senior school library, uh, to which I remember my father taking me one enchanted morning in the holidays. I think it was then that I entered this world. And at that time, perhaps I had no idea that this was a door. You did mention Diagonal Alley. And I was thinking, the existence of enchantment, everyday enchantments, that was something that I now realize was, and I say wrong footing, because when I came down to earth, literally, to the plains of North India, to Kanpur, at the age of 13, never a easy age. It was both a wake-up call as well as a kind of reality check, and I remember feeling completely severed. It's possibly no it's possibly one of the reasons why my novel is called Rupture, because the rupture between then and now, between Darjeeling and the plains of North India, all the possible fissures and fractures, no, I think happened at that when I moved. And yet I now realize how fortunate I am that I did have that chance to escape what was essentially a bubble. If I hadn't escaped that bubble, I may have been forever trapped in a thing of make belief. And now I can transfer that make belief into my fictional worlds, or even in some cases in poetry. But I'm very robustly grounded in the reality of this country, in the reality uh, of differences, of the heat and the dust. And it was almost as if I was a foreigner. I came down to earth, and I found that I was alien on the planet that was India. That was something that shook me. And I think unless you're shaken, no, unless your moorings are cut, perhaps you never make that leap into somewhere else. So in retrospect now, I feel, oh, good thing that my parents didn't leave me wrapped up in in a little lovely cocoon.
I see. And how long exactly were you in Ethiopia?
Oh, the grand total of 8 months as a child, as a being on the planet. My parents were there for 3 years. So my father was on this teaching contract. Sometimes I think, what was it about my parents that made them just say, okay, let's go to Africa? And they had a little boy already, my elder brother. And I was born there in 1970, November. And 71, they came back to India after the contract got over. Baba decided, you know what, let's go back to India. And sometimes I think, what would it have been like? Of all the countries that I've traveled and seen and experienced, Africa still is one that I've encountered only through my parents' stories. And so, in that sense, it's also fabula. It is, in some sense, mythical to me even now as an adult.
Speaking of fabula, I wanted to ask you, what kind of stories do you write for children? Because you write poetry, you write fiction for adults, and you also write fiction for children. So, what is the textural nature of that kind of work?
What a lovely question. But I have a feeling, and this is true, I must say this now, that I don't necessarily make a distinction. Okay, so some books happen to be for children because they've been commissioned by a children's publisher like Puffin or Scholastic. But texturally, I tend not to simplify or gloss over. And I think that probably explains why, for example, Ella, which is my one and only YA novel, has at its center this fantasy that this girl, Ella, must write in order to cope with reality. So for me, the fabula or the fantastical is not so much an escape, but a means of creating another narrative. Okay, if I am in charge of my own story, perhaps that will compensate for the fact that I have no control over a very cruel world. Okay, so for me, the fabula is really at the heart of my fictional enterprise, and I only realized this after writing the two novels. So in Rupture, there is one character called Tennyson who has no memory of his past, and he literally creates his own mythology, and he remakes his story, and um, it that his story is what gives the novel its name. So Land of the Well is not only about the link between illness and your mental condition, which is what really I'm exploring in a very contemporary setup, but at its heart is a much older form of storytelling where we look at the tropes, we look at the desert, we look at the water diviner, we look at the outsider. Tennyson, also perhaps known as Tansen, if you crunch up the name, is a storyteller. He is a foreigner. He is in danger. So that story doesn't necessarily end very well. He uses story as a way of getting out of a possibly dangerous situation. So I feel these are the ways in which I kind of use the fabula as not an alternative, but really the core. If we are to stay alive and stay well and stay healed, I treat the fabula as the place for that healing.
So there's a book title that I want you to say. Okay, the one with the frog. Please say it. It's so adorable.
This is a challenge. I am recovering, as you know, from a painful tooth surgery. It's a challenge. The Fried Frog and Other Funny, Freaky, Foodie, Feisty Poems.
You're not going to repeat it, right?
I would, if I could. One of the things I used to do in the good old days when we still had school visits, I used to go into these halls full of children and I would say, okay, you all know about alliteration. Let's try this one. And I would make them say it and make them repeat it and faster. And it used to create the most marvelous din. And once you create a din, everybody's ready for poetry. Then everybody's ready for silence that follows the day. So yeah, it's been a while since I did.
So, what does the fried frog do exactly?
The fried frog is a very nasty creature. I will treat you to what the fried frog does or is, as it happens. It's both. If I can even find it, because this is a book I haven't read from for ages. And then I will tell you the story. Oh, I should simply look at the contents. No, that's why contents were invented. 87. Yeah. Okay. This is a poem that is dedicated to another poet. I'll read out the dedication later because it gives the game away. The fried frog leapt onto my plate and looked at me quizzically. Said, "Look, mate, let's make a deal." I said, "Sure, what did you have in mind?" The fried frog said, "Call off this meal." I said, "You mean go hungry?" Fried frog said, "Yes, just once. Won't do you any harm. Have you looked in a mirror lately?" I said, offended by the rude green thing's reference to my girth, which I confess is stately. Listen, listen, you fried greaseball. No one tells me how to run my life. And with one quick flick, I popped the fried frog into my mouth and ate him. And now I will reveal to you what the fried frog is and who the dedicatee is. This is Matthew Hollis. A long time ago when he visited India at the Jaipur Literature Festival, there was a buffet with these round green puris. They were palak puris. And he said, "What are these?" He said, "What are these fried frogs?" And so in honor of this, he's the source of this. And so the book, this particular poem is dedicated to Matthew, who in a moment of inspiration called a palak puri a fried frog. Priya Kurian's illustration, if you can see it, is
Oh,
absolutely beautiful.
yes. Oh, yeah.
What you think it is, which is the fried frog. And there's a shockingly,
Accurate.
Matthew did here. Here is the person who was eaten, and it's funny how, without any briefing from me, Priya gave that character Matthew Hollis's hair. I don't know how she did it.
Okay. But that's really lovely. Seriously. So, from fried frogs, I would like to take you to cities. I understand, that you have some considerable work on cities, not just the book with Kartiga and the illustrators, but also something called Dirty Love. Yeah. So we would like to know a bit about that, more of Dirty Love than,
More dirty love than clean love.
Yes.
This is what I was mentioning when I was talking about yeah, this book of stories. And it's amazing you said neon, because here is the neon, this
Oh, yeah.
feel that somebody picked up, that this book's title needs to be a neon sign rather than a pavement or something like that. So I was really astonished by the acuity of your uh, words there. So yeah, so how did this happen? I think it happened because, as I said, of an obsession. Most first loves are obsessive, and as you go along, um, perhaps the scales fall from your eyes and you realize, okay, this love of mine, this great love of mine is, it can be a beast. It may be covered with carbuncles, so warts and all. This is a love that encompasses the thing that is Bombay slash Mumbai, in a sort of prismatic way, I think. And because I'm also interested in secret structures, this is a book which I constructed as I mean, it's not a rabbit hole. You know, I've been thinking about this thing. Is it a rabbit hole? No, I think it's more like what? How can I talk about Bombay? Okay, I think that was one of the things at one point in the writing process, Sonia. I remember telling my then editor at Penguin, Ravi Singh. I remember telling him, Ravi, how am I going to do this? Because look at all the people who've already written on Bombay. You know, you're thinking Rushdie, you're thinking, you know, you're just thinking of all the canonic. And remember that this is a book of prose, it's fiction. So you're thinking of all the big names that have written fiction or on Bombay. And he just calmed me down greatly by saying, Sampurna, it doesn't have to be the Bombay book. It's your Bombay book. And the minute he offered me this great gift, I knew exactly where I stood vis-a-vis my own material. Because sometimes you feel that, you know, has it already been said? What is it that I can bring that is new? And I think what I wanted to do is I wanted to tell the stories of those who don't get seen. You know, very often Bombay is such a cliche, na, sometimes. It's like Bollywood and finance and the underworld and all the lovely cliches, including the supposedly heartwarming ones about our resilience and all of that, you know. And I just wanted to fracture all of those and say, look, it's difficult, it's unfair, it's impossible, it's grueling, it's beastly, it's monstrous. But hell on top of it's hell. At one point, you know, there is a thing where in that eponymous one, now I'll just read that last 3 lines where this person is right literally in this subway, which is always flooding in the monsoon. And it and he writes, inside, with a great unearthly rumbling rolling over him, she here is, of course, the great love, the city. She smells of a flooded subway, low, dark, and narrow, fumes arising from the water, hellish and wonderful. I'm home. So, this hellish and wonderful home of mine, which took me in and made me hers and never spat me out, this is my long, complicated, obscure, kaleidoscopic love song in fiction to her.
You know, what you just said reminds me of the book that I'm reading right now, which is Jayant Kaikini's book that's been translated, No Presence, Please.
Yes.
And I've also been reading, simultaneously, sort of, The Unforgiving City by Vasudendra. And, there's T. Padmanabhan's book called Stories, which has been translated from Malayalam into English. And in all of these places, it is, these narratives of cities, and it's not their bigness that is being commented upon. It is those small aspects, like I mentioned, maybe an abandoned theater that is going to give way to a mall, and the 4 people who work in it. So similarly, stories very similar to the ones that you are narrating, those everyday difficulties of flooding subways and things not getting there on time, one not being heard, you know, all of these things. So
huge disparities, because I think sometimes we just gloss over them. So, I mean, there's one where there's a screenwriter who's trying to understand which Bombay should he write about for that, that killer script that is going to catapult him into the big league. And he's remembering a scene where he steps out of this 5-star hotel, and the smell of of ether and chloroform, because just next to this 5-star hotel is the Tata hospital, the cancer hospital. And it's just my way of marking these almost ephemeral and often just glossed over and trampled things. Um, but there is a sutradhar again, because I don't like collections that are just things thrown into a jhola and carried around. Huh? So there is an architecture. So there is one narrator, and clearly the obsession for the alien Sonia has pursued me since I was a little child. The concept of being the outsider, which of course becomes increasingly fraught in our days, because the one person who holds this entire grid of um, viewpoints, as it were, together, you realize that he's completely from somewhere very far away. And towards the end of the book, there is an entire meditation which asks, how far away is far away, and how do we measure belonging? How long must we stay in a place to really belong? So I'm also asking these very difficult questions about what makes home home, no? How do we prove it? It's not your ration card that proves it.
Talking about aliens and homes, I think we have to naturally progress to this marvel of a book called Space Gulliver. You know, when I came across this book, the first thing I saw was the narrative at the back. One second before we go on, Ruhi has to ask, how did you realize Mumbai is your home? That is, if it is.
Yes, it is. How did I realize it? I knew it the minute I stepped out of the airport. I had come on work, Ruhi, from Calcutta. I used to work in advertising in those days. I was sent on a film shoot. I stepped out of the airport, and I think I sniffed the air, and it was salty. And even Kolkata is by the sea, and Kolkata is fairly has its olfactory pleasures as well. But it just hit me like this adrenaline rush, and then and there, unknown to everyone, including family, boss, etc., etc., I decided, this is it. I'm moving here, and I did, and I never left. Yeah.
So it was love at first sight, like an intuition.
Absolutely.
Love at first smell. First
It's never happened before, and it's never happened since.
Wow.
The one true love.
So since settling in Mumbai, or Bombay, where else have you been to? For you to say that it's never been anywhere else.
I've lived and worked and traveled in India, no, when I used to work. So Chennai, and I studied in Delhi. So I've spent substantial amounts of time in all these places. But this is it's aggravating. And of course, now I live 30 kilometers north of the mythical, the tip of Bombay that you see in the postcards and in the. So I have sufficient distance, Sonia. I can see. I am closer to the hills now, where I am, Yebur Hills, outside my window. If you walk across Yebur Hills, you reach the other end of Sanjay Gandhi National Park, which features in my. If anyone uses this book as a walking guide and walks to different parts of Bombay and opens a page and says, is there a story about this part of Bombay? Even if it's an obscure alley, chances are there is. So I have found enough distance, because what happens is that you also start seeing what is going horribly wrong, no? And then it's hard, but it's nice to be reminded that somewhere here there is that glow still slowly burning. Thanks, Ruhi, for asking that.
Where do you stay now, by the way?
Thane.
Arey, you stay in Thane. I have a place in Dombivli.
That's what I'm saying. So Thane, Yebur Hills. I am
right there.
I'm liking this feeling, and also that, the hills obviously are not. I think of myself as a hill person essentially, no? So all of that.
Thank you, Ruhi. Thanks to you, I found out that Sampurna and I are technically neighbors. So yes, now we come to Space Gulliver, this remarkable book. So please tell us how you came to write it.
Oh. I came to... Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you please go on. Then I'll take the question from there.
I came to write it simply because I decided on a whim to go to Canterbury, and I got this fellowship, the Charles Wallace India Trust Fellowship, and I was a writer in residence for 3 months at the University of Kent. Arrived there in February. It's snowing. I'm all alone. I'm wondering why I'm there. And I look out of the window on a very, very bleak day. And I have to tell you that Space Gulliver was already in my life before that, all right? She had inhabited 6 poems. I won't even go in there because there is a particular, very long and lovely interview with Mustansir Dalvi. It's online and we can share it with the group later. So they can read about the genesis of Space Gulliver and the image actually. It was, the name Space Gulliver came to me in response to a piece of artwork. And I wrote 6 poems, but when I was feeling sorry for myself sitting in Canterbury, when I should have been feeling very privileged and happy, it was only day 2. I just had my mattress and stuff sorted out. And I was thinking, what am I going to do now? I have to write a book. Okay. And I said, okay, Space Gulliver. And I literally, Sonia, I kid you not, that first line, now, since you have that book in your hand, where I say, when the aliens land, they will take exactly that form. This is me looking out of the window and looking at the sky and looking at the streaks that planes leave when they break the sound barrier, and Space Gulliver just arrived to save me from my solitude. That's it. It sounds ridiculous for an adult to have an imaginary friend, but I already explained it away by blaming it on growing up in Darjeeling.
The image I have when you say these things is that of, I think it's a folk narrative, as well as it's a part of popular culture as well. About, I'm not very sure if it's Alice who does it also, where there is a piece of chalk, and wherever an exit is needed, she just draws it, and
It's nice, yeah.
So it reminds me of that when you talk. So when I read Space Gulliver, I thought, what an unusual choice of name. And then I wondered, does she mean Space is the name and Gulliver is a surname? If so, how many kinds of Gullivers are there? Is there a home Gulliver, a country Gulliver?
So Sonia, you just started me off on something new. Maybe I'll write a sequence. Sorry, I'm forgetting my words in my excitement. This is such an interesting question. Space Gulliver, if I had that image handy, I could have shown you. It's uncanny how that just popped into my mind in just that way. And if you see that image, it's there at the back of the book actually. There is in the acknowledgements, I think, where I mention, Judith Albert, thank you for making the art that inspired my first Space Gulliver poems. And I've shared the link. If I had the foresight to do that, I could have seen it. Maybe I can do it on my computer. But while I try to do that without getting
disconnected,
without getting disconnected and losing the thread of is to say that to answer your question, is it a surname? I never even thought of it like that. But here it goes. Here it goes. I found it. I just found it now. How do I share it?
You can share your screen.
I'll just share my screen. Yeah. I just hope it doesn't go into some, oh goody. This is, no, what I'm going to do is something even better. I'm going to put this in chat for those who want to catch up with this later. This is a really lovely interview that Mustansir did a while ago. And I'll put it here. And from the same interview, I'll try and share that image. And I think if you see this image, Sonia, you'll know at once what I mean, why Space Gulliver came into my mind. Because with your literary background, can you see it now?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you know what I mean now?
Yeah. Everything is there. Those aspects are there.
Yeah, so this is the thing. And then when I wrote this, and of course the poems are there in the book as well, I'll stop sharing. Um, I never thought she'd demand a larger universe to live in, you know. And but to answer your question, which I think is excellent, it could be. But this particular space Gulliver came from space, like because I was feeling so alienated sitting there, na, in this country that I knew so well from my literature, from my love of the language. I write in English. I feel I've been so many times to the UK. It's not an unfamiliar place to me, but I still felt out of sync. And Space Gulliver then became my way of negotiating my outsiderness. And I thought, oh, I've come from a very far away. And how far away is far away? For me, at that moment, it was outer space. But now that you've asked me this question, it could very well be Home Gulliver and Closet Gulliver. And thank you, Sonia. I think I'll dedicate the next sequence to you because you've just opened out this other possibility.
Thank you. So on that note, will you read something from Space Gulliver for us? Is that okay with you?
I will. In fact, it will be lovely to read something from you, from the book. Sorry, I'm just losing my language. Do forgive me. I don't know when they extracted my wisdom tooth, whether they've extracted some other things as well. Like my language tooth. Here goes. Space Gulliver's new posture of resistance. Space Gulliver's new posture of resistance, left hand fisted in her pocket, while right hand holds an apple, delicious and crunchy as the sunlight she is biting into. She was, until seconds ago, unaware of it as resistance, or posture, or even new. But something about the trilling and cheeping and whistling all around her alerts her to the possibility of posture, makes her happy because resistance needn't always be aggressive. Forgive the hard, clenched bones of fist. Reminds her that to recognize what is new is like singing. Heavy roar of vehicles, radio music from sports cars, the zippiness of morning. Even grinning with one's mouth wide open need not feel like the thing only a finger puppet might do. She is always holding something tight. It took the morning and the apple to tell her so. And I think this thing about not being able to grin, I normally have this very wide grin. Today I can't. And I just wanted to read this poem because also, isn't it funny how we always read the same poems? Always, always. I was determined not to read the same poems today.
Sorry, please.
No, I have another one. So, but I'll answer your question first.
Yeah, no, I was fascinated by the way that you look at things. See, that's one of those preoccupations that I have. I always am interested in how poets observe things. So the way that you talk about very, I don't know, things that possibly people haven't really thought about or don't put it out there in the middle of a conversation, like, do eyelashes grow back? And I absolutely love that thought. Do eyelashes grow back? Because I spent a considerable amount of time of my life, a significant bracket, preoccupied, because suddenly the thought came to my mind, how does your entire tongue fit in your mouth when it is closed? And then I wondered if there is a small bend. You just bend. And then, every time I caught myself with my mouth closed, I was like, now, did I do that consciously or is it how it is? And then I went and said this in class as well to the students. And then they spent a considerable amount of their time doing this. So when I read Do Eyelashes Grow Back, I found that almost kindred, you know. And then subsequently in another poem, you ask a very pertinent question, which contextualizes nature, culture, the world, and all these differences that we perceive. That is, in your country, what is a monster? Yeah,
Yeah.
so that thought behind it, Sampurna, could you
No,
please?
in fact, I'm so glad you asked that because that's also very early on in the book, and also because I construct the book as a kind of growing thing, because I did write every day, and it becomes a narrative. It does become a chronicle of this alien's life on that planet that we call Canterbury for the moment, right? And I think it's literally a presentation that I went to on monsters. And of course, because we are schooled in the literatures of the world, so we know the Minotaur, and we know all the hydras and medusas of the world. But it really this question, I think, would never have come to me if I wasn't in a different country, and if I wasn't thinking of how do we define it. So the definition itself is then unfixed, isn't it? It's not just the displacement of the person, which was me, but so to the unfixedness of these meanings. And I think I was very keen on confronting that and saying, look, there are other ways to read this word or to read this concept, and that there are parallel narratives which perhaps none of you in this room are aware of. And sometimes it would feel like a very white place, despite every good intention and very kind people. There were often blinkers, and I was thinking, let's look a little deeper. So all of those questions, it's not as innocuous. It's not a romp. The book isn't just a romp. Uh, it confronts the cultural uh, perplexities uh, of being British, of having daylight saving time. What happens when you lose a whole day? All those sort of things are sort of subtly embedded there, because I'm also I think I'm being slightly critical of these things because I'm in there. So I'm implicated. I'm perhaps even complicit, but I'm also saying, you know what? I'm looking and I'm unpicking it a little bit. So it was fun. I'm so glad you picked that up. And this thing about looking, sorry to go back to it, because I think looking is very central to my enterprise as a poet, perhaps because I have such weak eyes. So somewhere in this book, I think I have a line which says, looking a kind of listening to the wind.
Seeing complicity.
Yeah, so the complicit observer and all your senses conspiring to give you the world in all its sensorial splendor. What if blindness is a possibility not just in metaphoric terms? How can I then record the world in a way that um, that will not be too painful for me to revisit? That is also perhaps one of the things. I don't know.
And when you say that it was a building thing, it was the narrative. It builds. You can discern it all through. Where later on she goes on to take the picture of the ladybird, and then the city, and then you have all those narratives about the leaves. And the cathedral, Sampurna. I was very enchanted by the narrative of the cathedral. So on page, I think 5, you have the cathedral painted in a certain way. I hope you have the same edition.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, okay. So could you look at that?
Yeah, it says where the cathedral appears only when dark. Okay, let me start again.
Yeah.
The cathedral appears only when dark falls. The cathedral has cognition, knows when it will be upstaged. By day, it is a grey building. By night, it is glory, alleluia, in a shimmy of stardust.
And then on page 17,
Yes. Yes, absolutely. This is the sister poem. At midnight, the cathedral disappears. Yes, because they put off the lights. I had a room on the campus, directly on the edge of the campus. The cathedral was my lodestar, and it kept me grounded. It's so lovely that you've actually found those sister poems. If you get lost in Canterbury, you just have to look where is the cathedral and you can orient yourself. My need for orientation was metaphysical, but I love the fact that I could give the cathedral its own place, no, in the geography of this book. So, but if I may, I'll just read the second Space Gulliver. I'm not going to read the whole one, just the beginning, because it connects. It's much later on. It's on page 71, by which time Space Gulliver is becoming a native. She's acclimatized, okay? And many other things are happening, but it has that key word, the word that keeps recurring in this conversation. Space Gulliver can breathe again. The kind of breathing that rides the sun on its back, watches steam rising into mouths, is aware of the changeness of sound, the way wheel on tar can meld into the ceaseless breathing of the road. For months now, a patch of land had glittered into her existence, so sharp it could only be sheet metal, water, or mercury. This morning, in its exact location, a patch of yellow, like a piece of mirror flashing the sun. Rape seed, the ugly word flowering into the approximation of mustard, the light of home.
Is there a reason why the color of the book is what it is? Because Space Gulliver at one point dreams that what came first, the egg or the chicken? Yeah, she's cracked the conundrum of the egg,
Okay.
and then there too it comes. Yellow matters.
Every poet should be lucky enough to have you for a reader, because I think you read into and through and around and beyond and under in a way that is amazing. I never thought of it at all. And the earlier cover, which I don't have handy unfortunately, but you can find it online, was completely different. It had my boots on it. It has my walking boots in it, which broke because I walked so much. I couldn't bear to throw them away. That's the kind of person I am. So I actually photographed them in different locations. So my boots were on the cover. But when this entire book got rejacketed, yellow was the color that was assigned to me. It's exactly the right color. Wow. Thank you. I know it wasn't intentional at all. Muted. You're muted.
What about the yellow in the recurring yellow mustard?
I hadn't noticed it till this moment. That's what I mean when I say you're a reading detective. I hadn't noticed it. Yellow matters, right in the original, the conundrum of the egg, and now yellow. And there are more recurrences like this. Yeah. So, well, something is right with the world.
When I read this, Ruhi says, why do you say that it is exactly the right color now?
In retrospect, there's no such thing as wisdom, only hindsight. That's why. So in hindsight, it's just the right color.
So yeah, when I was reading the book and I came to 103, where the Space Gulliver, can I give away the ending or something? Is it okay?
The ending. Of course you can. Yes, of course.
Okay, so Space Gulliver finds the sparrow and realizes that, it is now time to probably go back. And then I was very upset. I was thinking, what? It's over. And then as a bonus, after acknowledgements, there she is again.
But this is like a reverse. It's like time travel in reverse, if that makes sense. Because as where I've written in my acknowledgements, because remember the very first Space Gulliver poem starts with Space Gulliver returns. no context about where she returns from. But to reward the reader for their patience and their kindness and their meticulousness and their absorption, right at the end, I say, for those who are curious about where Space Gulliver returned from, is where I give you the back history. So yeah, but it's that moment of sadness. I'm really touched that you felt it, because when it was time for me to leave, I was sad. I was leaving my nest for 3.5 months. It was a nest, and it was sad. So it's very interesting that that melancholy has transmitted itself. And is it about time for us to leave our session? And we've spent it all talking about this visitant.
We've talked about you, so that's good. I was thinking when you said that, the thing is that probably, many people will identify with this also. When we travel in train compartments and we've been there in that compartment for more than 2 days, leaving it feels like leaving a sense of home. You walk back or you look back and you see the compartment that you were so much a part of. So when Space Gulliver is preparing to leave, I was reminded of certain train journeys that have taken more than 2 days, and how I felt at the end of it. So that sense of departure, but at the same time, I might be coming back by the same train. So that rewinding that you mentioned, it's easily identifiable. One just has to, I suppose, look slightly beyond or deeper into the very muslin kind of curtain that you've drawn, and they'll see that probably across is a mirror. So that identifiability, I suppose, is what is the USP of this book. It could be sci-fi because somebody asks, can poetry be sci-fi? So it is sci-fi. At the same time, it is intensely human. It is intensely rooted in the vicissitudes of this earth. So that's what I found about this book, and in general about the way you write. Because when I looked at, I don't know to read Bangla, and I can't understand much of it either. But then I looked at the translation that you did of Joy Goswami's book, and I found it marvelously delicate. I'm just looking around for the bookmarks right now. Yeah, so I found it marvelously delicate. I suppose he would have said these things in Bangla, and they would have been extremely mellifluous. And then you brought them into English, and just beautified it. It's silken. That's what I felt when I read it. So, as a translator, making sure that things don't jar itself is victory number one. But to make it sound like you did not miss anything by reading the Bangla, though it is a bit arrogant to think like that, it is something itself. Yes.
Yeah, but that's so lovely to hear, because that the fact that you were courageous enough to say that you didn't miss anything. Joyda makes an excellent collaborator in that sense. He's a wonderful partner in this enterprise called translation. And I think also, when you hear him read, and some of the complex poems, I would ask him to just read them. And then you get the play also, you get the tonalities, and then you travel with those tonalities in your head. So it's not just the words, it's the inflections and, things that would possibly not be immediately apparent. But yeah, it's been quite wonderful translating him now. I mean, it's been a long journey, let's put it that way.
So maybe I should be a middle class auntie and then ask you, so Sampurna, ab aage ka plan kya hai? What are you planning?
Aage ka plan? Yeah, no, you must ask aage ka plan, because it's so difficult to think beyond. Sometimes I find, especially over the last 2 years, so difficult to think beyond the moment and the day, and Aage ka plan, I think, would be perhaps bringing some of my, it's been almost Space Gulliver reissued version came out in 2020, which is a minor miracle in itself that a poetry book should have a second life. But there are so many uncollected poems. So I think being my own editor, because I've so enjoyed editing and, putting together books for other people, I'm thinking, why not extend that service to myself and maybe put together, see how something shapes up for a new poetry book. It seems too uh, ambitious or premature even to say that, because I have not done that for a while. And but because you asked, I'm telling you, this is actually what I would like to do if it were possible over the next year or so, because there are lots of things floating out there. There are many poems here and there, um, and I would love to see how it all adds up, because like I said, I'm not in favor of just putting them together and saying here is a selected works or a collected works. So it's the thematic I'm after. Let's see what happens. Not sure yet.
So I think we could probably conclude. Is there anything you would like to say? Wait, Ruhi has a question. How long did it take for you to write your poetry books, and what was the process?
Each depended. Ruhi, I wrote Space Gulliver in 3.5 months. But that's because it was a project. It was conceived that way. I wrote Fried for a Frog, possibly over a year, whatever the publishing deadline was. So project-based books would take about a year. It's much harder when you're putting together your own work, which is written in response to moments in time or private lines of inquiry that you were pursuing at given points. So those, I think editing really takes much longer for me than writing. So rewriting, editing, collating. Yeah. Should I end with just 2 words from Joy Goswami?
Why not?
Do we have like a minute? It won't even take 30 seconds. This is from the new book called After Death Comes Water. And I'm just going to end with this because...
So what we could do is, Sampurna, I'll say my conclusion, and then you end with your lines, and we will stop the meeting. That will be more poetic for the effect of it. What do you say?
I hope I'm not mucked up your POA as I'm known to do.
No, that was no. I just thought of it. Then sometimes I want to do these things.
Okay, whatever.
I just wanted to say that in conversation with Sampurna Chatterjee has been a very rewarding experience, because I got to see her mind, which is labyrinthine, which is convoluted, has so many turns and twists, and at the same time, it follows a beautifully straight path. I mean, it's a very complex structure. And to be the owner of such a beautiful mind, I suppose, gives you this depth and stretch of visual and sensory imagination that makes all the difference. I love the way that you deal with the sense of loneliness, the way that you look at time, and the way that you say things like daylight or morning. I suppose morning looks at the door, and what she read as thirsty light turned out to be 38. And then look at all those missed opportunities. And then I was thinking of daylight creeping up like that, and just I was struck by it. So to be able to write like that, you have to have the kind of vision that you have, and to have the kind of vision that you have, it is important to have the kind of mind that you have. So I really, really adore your mind, and I'm glad that the mind is in conversation with us today. The two notwithstanding.
Oh gosh, because you said about vision, anyone will think we've actually choreographed this. Okay, this is a poem from, it's poem 96 from a sequence of very short prose poems, and I'll just read it out. You've got to do something for me, otherwise how shall I survive? At least make a bushy jungle out of evening. Show me crickets and fireflies. Show me some serpents and snakes. Show me a one-eyed ghost, a future that winds far away in the moonlight over the uneven, bumpy land. Show me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.